when you're the best of friends.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where two Disney fans are revisiting the so-called Walt Disney animated classics, reappraising them with a modern eye to decide if they're truly worthy of being called classics. Why Waly Gisnep? Well, if you're a 4-year-old reading Walt Disney's weird signature, it looks like the words Waly Gisnep. I'm Ben, and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, which film are we looking at this week?
This week, Ben, we're looking at the 1981 film The Fox and The Hound, an adaptation of Daniel P. Mannix's 1967 novel of the same name. Now, I mentioned this at the end of our last episode, but this is actually the film I have watched probably more than any other. We're not getting to 150 watchings of the Jungle Book levels here, but it's still a fair bit above any other film that I've seen. And all but the most recent watchings of those were when I was very young, so I was very keen to revisit this film.
So what you're saying is, this film and you had a very close relationship where you were young, an amount of time has gone by and then you've met up again, and you're reappraising your relationship.
I can see what you're getting at there, but I have to say, the ending for me in this film might not be as pleasant as the ending for our Fox and Hound.
I mean, that doesn't bode well, because this film does not have a happy ending.
I mean, it has a satisfying ending, I suppose.
Well,
it has a bittersweet ending, whereas I think my reevaluation of this film has just a bitter ending.
Well, before we get ahead of ourselves then, let's start by going through the plot of The Fox and the Hound. We get a very atmospheric opening, as we're still in the early 80s. We don't have the credits at the end of the film, but still have them at the start. Now, I timed the opening credits of this film. They're 5 minutes long.
I really like the opening credits. The fog effect that Disney is using at this time is excellent and is very atmospheric. It feels like a film of the 80s. There was a much darker tone happening in children's animation at this time, and when the film opens, that's what you feel you're getting in for.
It's funny you say that. My first two notes are, this is very atmospheric. In fact, the first couple of minutes of that 5 minutes, there's no music at all. You just get still shots of the forest, and it's incredibly tense. But my second note is, this animation is so 1981. I don't know if it's the colouring or the proportions of the characters, probably a combination, but it just looks so 80s as a film. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think if you just saw a piece of this animation in a vacuum and you knew anything about the history of animation, you'd be able to pinpoint it almost to the year.
Before we get into what happens in the credits, I've got a few notes about the names. Again, despite this being an adaptation of an existing novel, we have 8 writers. Later in the film, I can kind of see how that happens.
Hang on, sorry. I need to go back one. This film does not have a lot of plot. I mean, I know I've complained about this in the past, but my god, 8 writers.
I mean, I feel 4 of those writers are simply credited for making the controversial decision at the midpoint of this film, and that's it. We also have, in our animators, we've got John Musker popping up again, reminding us that we are closing in on greatness. We're almost there, we've just got to get through the 80s. I believe as well, actually, Ron Clements was involved in the film, though I didn't spot his name in the credits.
Do you think it was seeing all the miserable films they put out in the 70s and 80s that made them go, God, let's make something fun?
Well, it's interesting because culturally, this is a really important film where the kind of old guard of Disney were stepping down and in some cases dying, but that's a whole other thing. And The Fox and the Hound was seen as the project where they were kind of handing over the reins of the company. So a lot of younger animators, very famous, important animators were involved in this. As I said, we've got Musker and Clements. John Lasseter was involved in this film. Tim Burton did a lot of concept art for it. So this was the young blood of Disney's first real animated feature. And as we mentioned in the previous podcast, there was some involvement from Don Bluth, before he grew frustrated with the processes at Disney and, along with several other animators, left to found the Don Bluth Animated Studios. So the film is a really interesting snapshot of that transition from one generation to the other. Another thing I really enjoyed in the credits is there is a page crediting the writers and singers for the various songs in this film, and when this popped up, my first reaction was, I don't remember there being any songs in this film, and I'll remind you, I've seen this more than any other film.
I knew... Is it just called Best of Friends, the main song? I remember that song, and then I think there's 4 listed in the credits. I was like, 4 songs? Having literally watched this film an hour ago, I still can't count 4 songs in this film. I swear they're making it up.
I have the same point. I've just watched the film, and I can remember maybe 2 of the songs.
There's a poem at one point. Are we calling that a song?
And so the opening sequence of this film is establishing shots of a forest of some kind, and we don't really see much at the start. Eventually, we focus in on a very distressed looking fox, and we see that the fox is carrying a pup in their mouth, and it becomes very clear that they're running away from a hunter. Immediately, this is all very reminiscent of Bambi, which I quite like.
Yeah, it'd be like Bambi opening with Bambi's mum being shot. That's the tone we're going for in this film. Also, if Bambi was a lot younger and didn't have a dad.
And instead of Thumper, we had many annoying side characters.
I'd argue we had many annoying side characters in Bambi.
And so, yeah, as you say, the fox is eventually caught and shot. It all happens off screen, and we're left with an abandoned fox pup, who I have to say is absolutely adorable.
Yeah, again, I've just got a note saying, God, baby Todd is cute. His eyes are almost as big as his head. It just is such a sad opening to a film. And this is coming from someone, you know, my favourite novel's Wuthering Heights. And I watch this film and go, oh, this is a bit heavy going. At least Bambi and Dumbo, you get a bit of time where the character's happy with their mum. Whereas this is just, mum's dead, move on.
I think both have their merits and their detriments. I think showing time with the parent obviously makes the loss more impactful for the audience, but it also focuses on that. That is the focus and what the story is about. Obviously, with Dumbo, we're just waiting for him to be reunited with his mum. Here, the parent is just taken out of the picture straight away because the parental bonds are not relevant to this story.
Although the fox pup does soon pick up a replacement parental figure in the form of Big Mama, an owl who is inexplicably always up in the day.
I never noticed that. And you say he gets a replacement parental figure. She has no interest in that and would much rather shirk those responsibilities to someone else. She doesn't even want to do the legwork of finding another parent. She just gets her 2 mates to do it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Liam, if you found, you know, an orphan just in the street, your first thought wouldn't be, I'm going to take responsibility for this. It'd be, oh, I'll call someone and they'll sort it out.
Yeah, but it would be calling someone who I think could sort it out, not just calling you and saying, can you sort this out for me?
Yeah, that's fair. So who does she call to help out with this problem?
She calls comic relief side characters, who in this film have the names Dinky and Boomer. In fact, are these the first duo of comic relief side characters?
I mean, I guess it depends what we're calling side characters. Like, you could argue Jasper and Horace. I guess you could argue Hook and Smee.
They're basically just Timon and Pumbaa, but rubbish.
Now, my only note on the birds is that Boomer has the voice of Tigger, so I immediately dislike him. And just to be clear, I'm not saying this is the same voice actor. He's doing exactly the same voice, down to the little laugh. I
will take the voice of Tigger over an inexplicable New York accent any day. The personalities are Tigger and a New York taxi driver. And I don't know why they came up with that.
Liam, you're gonna love Hercules.
And so Dinky and Boomer help Big Mama. They trick the nearby Widow Tweed into discovering Todd with the optimistic hopes that she'll look after him rather than putting him out of his misery.
Now, knowing how this film plays out, there's a part of me that thinks this is arguably the worst decision they could have made. Because if they'd just left him in the wild and maybe found another fox to look after him, or, I don't know, just helped him out, could have solved a lot of problems. That said, Dinky and Boomer spend the entirety of this film trying to eat one caterpillar over the course of a year, so I don't know how they're surviving.
If Disney is teaching me one thing, it is that you should never leave a creature in the care of a different species. It will always lead to trouble. Whether it's a boy left with wolves or a fox left with people, swap those over. Leave Mowgli with Widow Tweed and Todd with the wolf pack.
I think that will end quite well for Mowgli. I don't think that's going to end well for Todd.
Shere Khan finds out there's a fox in the jungle.
I just picture him just like, okay, why is anyone telling me this? Last point on the birds, I promise. They don't need to be in this film. Now, I'm going to say it, I don't think this film really has enough plot. I think it's very, very light on plot, which isn't intrinsically a bad thing, but about 10-15 minutes of the runtime is just the two birds trying to eat a caterpillar, and it goes nowhere and has nothing to do with the main plot.
I was thinking about this a lot watching it because it feels very intrusive when we cut to the birds and the caterpillar. And it just made me think of just how intensive a process making an animated feature film is, particularly when you only have maybe one or two animators working on each character. So really you want lots of characters and lots of different segments so that you could split the workload across multiple teams. And the fact that I spent most of the running time thinking about that kind of says why it doesn't work so well in this case. So we're introduced to Widow Tweed, who immediately stood out to me as a Don Bluth character. So I looked into it and I was right. That was a character he was animating before he left the project, which is why midway through the film, her animation changes slightly. And there are some scenes where you can tell that there are multiple character animators working on her throughout different scenes. And you can kind of pinpoint the scenes that Don Bluth worked on and the ones that I think it was John Musker who actually took over, which is interesting.
Yeah, I feel this is a character that's maybe a little bit underexplored. So this film is light on plot, but it's quite focused on relationships between characters, and I just find myself wanting a little bit more. Maybe this would be too heavy-handed, but this character's a widow. That's kind of the only backstory we get to her, so she's a bit lonely, so she takes the fox in, but maybe just giving her a little bit more motivation, or just something to give her a bit more of a dimension so we can empathise with her and understand the significance of this relationship. Maybe I'm wanting too much here, but quite a lot of the film is about her relationship with Todd, which is what she calls him as a sort of abbreviation of toddler because he's a little fox. So it seems weird that they don't really do anything with it.
I would go one step further and say very few, if any, of the relationships in this film are given the time they need. You just kind of have to assume a lot and do the legwork yourself.
Oh, I totally agree. It's just we haven't got to the other relationships yet, Liam.
Speaking of other relationships, we do get to our second protagonist. We see a young pup brought home by the nearby farmer, hunter.
Twat. The local twat.
Amos, voiced by Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka.
I knew I recognised that voice. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Once you know it, it's all you can hear. So Grandpa Joe brings home a young bloodhound named Copper, who, once again, is absolutely adorable.
So Liam, obviously we've got young versions of the two main characters here, which means we've got child actors. How do you rate these on the Liam scale of child voice actors?
Not only do we have child actors, we have one of the child voice actors. Voicing Copper, we've got Corey Feldman. And I've got to say, he's not good.
No, and this is before all the drugs.
I think this is maybe his second role, I looked up. His first really, I say starring role, the young characters aren't in it very long. We've also got Keith Mitchell voicing young Todd, who I don't think is very bad. I think he's all right. It's passable, and he's not in the film long enough for it to be a nuisance. But Corey Feldman sounds very young, but I think he was like 10 when they recorded this, which I can't get my head around because it sounds like they've put a mic in front of a 5-year-old. And yeah, it grates on me.
I guess Wolfgang Reiterman's sons were just too old at this point. I'm 20, Dad. Now, I know it shouldn't matter that much, but the fox should be called Copper because it's a copper-coloured fox.
No, Copper is copper-coloured, isn't he? Copper's like a brown, isn't it? I am not the person you should be having this conversation with. We jump forward some time where both animals have grown up a little bit, but they're still very young. We have a rather disturbing scene where Widow Tweed squirts cow's milk directly into Todd's mouth.
Yeah, this is a step up from the Dalmatian puppies drinking straight out of the cow's udders. There's something just weird about firing milk through the air into someone's mouth. I don't know why I find it weird.
Todd ends up scaring the cow in some way. I'd be quite scared too if that had just happened to me. And Widow Tweed sort of sends him outside to play because having an unsupervised fox pup roam about your country farm is always a good idea. Meanwhile, we have Copper, who is adjusting to his life with Amos and his elder dog, Chief, voiced brilliantly by Pat Buttram. And when I say brilliantly, I mean doing the same performance.
In 3 of his 4 roles in these films, he's played a wolfy dog type character.
I think the animators might have just been trying to tell him something.
You look like a dog, Pat.
Can I voice a nice, handsome, young prince? No.
So when Amos brings little puppy Copper, he dumps him outside with Chief and he's like, right, you've got to look after him. And I'm like, is Amos planning to feed Copper? Or is he like, nope, that's Chief's responsibility now?
Yeah, Chief is a bit standoffish and dismissive of the young Copper, but he warms to him gradually. He even lets him sort of sleep on him in the way that dogs like to sleep on piles, which, again, is very adorable. Everything to do with the young animals is pretty adorable, other than the voice actors.
I actually think this highlights probably what I think is my favourite part of this film, and I don't know how much of this is intentional or not, but I think there's a lot in this film about a male inarticulacy when it comes to emotions. So the relationships between Copper, Chief and Amos are all really interesting because they're clearly 3 characters who don't really know how to express how they feel towards each other and to express positive emotions towards each other. So it's very job driven, and rather than expressing positive emotions towards each other, they have to be united by negative emotions towards something else. And there's just a lot of subtle moments, particularly later on in the film, where that relationship starts to change and it goes from Chief being a sort of fatherhood figure to kind of getting pushed out and pushed to one side. And I do feel there's some quite nice nuances throughout the film with those relationships.
Going back to an earlier point, I will say that the relationship between Copper and Chief is probably the best in the film. And if they'd stuck to their guns, would have worked really well, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
They should have called it The Hound and the Hound.
Cut the caterpillar, cut the fox.
It's just 2 stoic dogs.
So Copper picks up a scent that he doesn't recognise and he goes on the hunt for it. Eventually it leads him to Todd. He doesn't immediately realise that the scent is Todd, and there's quite a nice little scene where he's like, oh, it's you I can smell. Delivered very poorly by Corey Feldman. And then the 2 play hide and seek, which they make a point that it's kind of cheating for Copper to be seeking. And this is all to a song sung by Big Mama called Best of Friends, which, in a pattern of things to come for this film, is incredibly mawkish.
Yeah, it's fine. I think my main complaint with it really is, like, these characters aren't the best of friends. They've literally just met. And from Todd's perspective, he's only met 4 beings. You know, it's not... I don't know. I feel we could have spent longer establishing this relationship before getting to this point and maybe have something unite them rather than just they have fun together.
No, I completely agree. I think the song and the sequence is completely undeserved. And it ends with them saying, we're best of friends. We'll always be best of friends, right? And I'm like, you don't know this creature. I feel if I had to make a change, turn it into a montage. I think it might even be supposed to be a montage of them playing hide and seek over several days. Instead, it just comes across as one game of hide and seek over a few hours. And suddenly now they're inseparable. And I think they could have made better creative decisions here.
It's not really fair to compare this film to The Lion King, but I'm going to do it. The first 20 minutes of that film is all about establishing a relationship between Simba and Mufasa, and we see how they deal with problems together and deal with things separately. We get so many parallels between them. Like, one of my absolute favourite visuals in that film is Simba puts his paw in the paw print of Mufasa, and it tells you, just in a very simple image, so much about their relationship and that they're the same, but Simba's got a lot of growing to do, and he wants to walk in Mufasa's footsteps and all that lovely stuff. And this film doesn't do that at all. This film says, we are telling you these characters have a great relationship and they're the best of friends. We're not going to show you any of that. We're telling you it. We've sung a song. You have to accept that's now a universal truth.
No, that's a very good point. At several key points in this film, it really does feel like tell more than show, which makes the emotional beats they're going for a lot harder to buy.
And I think there's definitely good stuff in this film, but when the crux of the film is based on this relationship between the two of them, if you fail to establish that at an emotive level for a viewer, it's really hard for the rest of the film to work as you intend it to.
So we move forward with our now inseparable best of friends, and Todd comes to visit Copper one night, and they're kind of jokingly talking about Chief while he's asleep. Eventually, in his sleep, Chief catches the smell of Todd and just goes after him, and it turns into a chase. This sequence, they could have gone one of two ways. They chose to go comedic, and I think they should have instead gone for more of a terrifying and tense chase sequence, because there are elements to this that end up feeling that way, but you can't appreciate the tension because they're offset with this wacky music and slapstick antics with Chief. Like, this is deadly serious. There is a large dog chasing after a fox pup with the intention of killing him.
Yeah, and this is basically meant to be Chief modelling behaviour for Copper, right? He's saying, this is how we react to foxes, this is what we do. So it being a bit silly is problematic. In fact, this sequence does end with something I always love to see in a film, or in real life, and that's a hillbilly angrily stamping on their own hat.
Tonally, this sequence is a nightmare. It's not comedic enough to make up for how serious and scary the situation is. We also get Amos literally shooting someone off the road at this point.
Yeah, there's several points in this film. As you say, he's shooting at her as she's driving. Later on, he goes over to a house with a gun and just tries to barge in. And I was sat there thinking, call the police! He's insane.
Now, it's at this point that if you want the full effect of this film, you have to pause it and put on the sequel, or rather the midquel, The Fox and the Hound 2.
Liam, for those who are unfamiliar with The Fox and the Hound 2, bear in mind the original film is about duty and kind of an analogy for race, or how we see people from different social groups and when we're told not to like them and how we judge that. What is The Fox and the Hound 2 about?
In The Fox and the Hound 2, a county fair comes to the area and Copper is scouted
It makes me laugh every time. Sorry.
And Copper is scouted by a singing dog band. And obviously, his success with this singing dog band drives a wedge in his friendship with Todd, because he wants to be successful, but don't want to be hanging around with that loser Todd. Eventually, he makes the decision that he'd rather be friends with Todd, there'd be a successful dog singer, and then we can resume the Fox and the Hound.
I will say this, none of that will ever be mentioned in the second half of this film. It's so weird. I think I might be wrong, I think the first midquel was Belle's Enchanted Christmas, because Disney looked at Beauty and the Beast and said, this is a hugely popular film. How can we wring some more money out of it? Well, we could do a prequel, except the characters haven't really met yet. And we could do a sequel, but people like the humanoid candlesticks and clocks and things, so we can't really do that because they're humans at the end. So we'll do a midquel. We'll do a film set during a montage in the film, because then we can still have the characters as people like them. And they're like, yeah. Well, we've got a similar problem with Fox and the Hound. Right, okay. What's literally the first thing you can think of? One of them joins a band. Great, we're making that.
It's also just where it slots, because Chief is an established character and is aware of Todd in the sequel. Therefore, it's after this. But the next scene in this film is the men going off hunting. So it has to happen here. It's the only time.
Oh, dear.
If you ever get a chance...
Don't watch it. If you get a chance to not watch it, don't watch it.
No, if you ever get a chance, watch midquels as they're intended by pausing the film they're a midquel of.
Well, my next note on this film is going to be such a tonal U-turn for this podcast, but then again, I feel that is appropriate for the Fox and the Hound, because Amos and Chief say to Copper, right, you've got to go and learn to be a hunting dog, and we're going to teach you how to follow your role in society. And Copper's very like, oh, well, I want to do the right thing. And Todd's like, oh, he'll still do the right thing. But then afterwards, because there's an authority figure telling him to do the wrong thing, he does it. And I was like, this film is just teaching kids about the Milgram experiment.
I really like this sequence. I think it's probably the best sequence in the film, where Amos, Chief, and Copper all go hunting, and we actually see some character development in Copper. It's done as a montage, the music's very nice. I think the score of this film actually is really working overtime. It's pretty good. And we see Copper grow up into the dog he's always supposed to be. He is a hunting dog. And whatever your personal feelings may be about hunting, in the context of this film, Amos bought a dog to train him as a hunting dog, and we see that happening. And it's a really nice montage sequence, and we actually see that Chief is almost supplanted as the alpha of the two. But it's never malicious. I don't think Copper sort of sees himself as better than Chief. He starts seeing him more as an equal, and you get an impression that they are building a relationship as well, albeit one of, replacement.
I think this sequence is strong because it's one of the times in the film where they show rather than tell. And I also think it sets up the end of Act 2 by establishing a motivation for Chief to be more reckless and to be more desperate for affection by him feeling threatened that Copper is replacing him.
So that's what's happening for Copper over the winter. What happens to Todd?
Nothing?
Not quite nothing. First of all, Dinky and Boomer decide to show Todd a shed full of corpses, which, that's nice.
For people who haven't seen this film, they're animal skins. They're not human corpses.
And as an audience, you might be like, oh god, yeah, that is what hunters do. But what these birds have done is just walk him into a shed full of skin. Like, it would be the equivalent of someone showing you Leatherface's barn. But no, that's all that happens to Todd over winter. We don't see any character development for him. Oh, I suppose we're shown that he's had to be kept indoors, which doesn't really make any sense because Amos is gone. This would be the one time where you can actually be like, he can be outdoors and playing, and then when Amos is back, I'll keep him locked in. Also,
she's not keeping him in because when it's spring, he's just out and about. If anything, she keeps him in when Amos is away, and as soon as Amos is back, she lets him out again.
Oh, I know how to wind him up.
Now listen here, Todd. I'm going to play fast and loose with your life to piss off my neighbour.
And yeah, we're into spring. Both animals have grown up, now voiced by Mickey Rooney and Kurt Russell, which is interesting.
It's such a weird cast, right? You've got Kurt Russell, you've got Mickey Rooney, so you've got like this 80s film star and this sort of old hand. You've got Corey Feldman and you've got Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka. Like, what is this cast? The only film I can think of with a weirder one is the James Bond film A View to a Kill. Which features Roger Moore, Christopher Walken, and Grace Jones.
With the hunting trip over, Amos, Chief, and Copper return. There's a strange moment where Todd sees them coming back and just sort of says, wistfully, wow, Copper's gotten big. And there's something sort of, it's a bit homoerotic, is all I was going to say.
Well, I genuinely, like, there's a very short moment just before they go swimming in a pond when they are little. And, like, I really do feel there's a romantic undertone between the two characters. Just they're quite touchy-feely with each other. And it's just kind of a moment of that. Again, I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but I definitely think there is that element to these characters.
As two basically straight white men, it's not really our place to do a queer reading of The Fox and the Hound. Though there's definitely something to be said of the idea of when you see childhood friends, particularly boys, and they play together and sort of disapproving parental figures can step in and be like, no, that's not how boys play. The accent suggests I'm going into some trauma there. It's not.
Regardless of where your family are from, if you have disapproving family members, someone will come through with a northern accent, wherever in the world, and they'll say, no, there'll be none of that.
So yeah, I'm cautious about applying a queer reading to this, but I'd love to see it. I might do a bit of research after this to see what's out there, because there's definitely those elements, but maybe they're no more than you find in any friendship at that young age.
I guess for me, coming into this, I remembered this film as being coded as being primarily about race and saying characters who are this different should be enemies. Society says they should be in conflict with each other, therefore they shouldn't be friends. That was kind of my vague memory of it. But rewatching it, to me, the queer reading stands as more prominent because, as I say, you've got a lot of stoic male characters who aren't great at quantifying how they feel. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that there's this kind of frisson of young romance between Todd and Copper, and that Amos and Chief are like, that's not how we do things, we're going to take you away and make you into a man. Again, I don't think that is explicit in any way, but I definitely think in terms of subtext, that is probably the one that comes through strongest for me.
And having been scared straight by his time in the woods, when Todd comes to visit Copper, Copper turns him away and says, those days are over, I'm a hunting dog now. That one day we played hide and seek, it's meaningless to me now. I think at this point, he spent more time away from Todd than he ever did with Todd, right?
Well, during the spring/summer when they're pups, it's not clear how long it is, maybe like at most a few weeks, but obviously some of that Copper was in a dog band, so... where he's now been away for a good 6 to 9 months. So yeah, proportionately, the percentage of their lives they've spent together is quite small.
It would have been quite good if Todd walked over and was like, hey Copper, and Copper was like, who are you? Oh, you're that fox I threw away my singing career for.
Oh god.
Honestly, if you've not seen The Fox and the Hound 2, do it, and it just recontextualizes this film so well.
So things quickly escalate, and once again, Todd is chased from Amos's farm by Chief and Copper. The stakes being higher this time, Amos is even more determined to kill Todd, and Chief and Copper are both big hunting dogs, so they chase Todd through the forest.
This sequence is great. They play it seriously because it is a serious moment. It's an echo of the earlier scene. And I know that they've grown up, so you want the first one to not be as serious, but I think you can have stakes in the first one, and maybe the younger members of the chase don't realise how serious it is, whereas now they're fully grown up, they realise the full danger and what is at stake here. The music's completely different. Rather than that rubbish kind of bouncy music. This sounds like something out of a Bond chase sequence of all things.
Yeah, it's really intense, and I think you're absolutely right in that earlier sequence undermines this a little bit. I can see what they were going for, and actually, I think rather than making that initial sequence more intense, they should have done the opposite and made it more lighthearted and fun, and have Todd have a bit of fun and go, oh, this is kind of like a game. And then initially at the start of this sequence, that's what he thinks it is, and very quickly he realises, no, the stakes have changed. I think that would work better than what we actually get, but I don't think I'd necessarily change anything about this second sequence.
You know, I think I agree, because looking back to that first sequence, my problem was that they didn't land the comedy, and Chief is very much the butt of the joke. He's the one that has all the slapstick elements, whereas Todd is played straight. Todd is running for his life in that first sequence, so it doesn't work very well. But you're right, if that change where he sees it as a game and then the slapstick works, and let's maybe remove Amos shooting Widow Tweed off the road, but even that's played for comedy. It is a mess, the first one, but you're right, let's have the first sequence be a game, even though it is dangerous, and then we revisit it with the lens of maturity, and it's like, oh, this is serious. And this leads to one of, if not the most contentious issues in the film, which is Todd flees up into the mountains and is chased by Chief, more determined than ever to prove his place as the alpha in his pack. And they end up on a railway bridge. And whilst Todd manages to escape, it is implied that Chief is hit by a train and falls hundreds of feet to a body of water at the bottom. And we see his lifeless corpse. But Chief opens his eyes to tell the audience that everything's okay. Now, when I watched this film a few years ago, this scene came up and everything about it told me Chief was supposed to die there. So I went to look at the original book, and in the original book, Chief does die. And the final act of the film is animated as if Chief did die. The story is all based around that. It entirely hinges on the fact that Todd is responsible for the death of Chief. But the director, Art Stevens, and the higher-ups, they weren't comfortable killing a main character in a Disney film. And so we see this kind of locking of horns between a lot of the younger animators involved in the film who were really pushing for the original story because they said the story only works if Chief dies. And Art Stevens, with the backing of the execs, they were just too reluctant to put it in. And I think this one change, more than anything else in the film, really takes away any of its teeth.
I agree, and sometimes we flippantly say, like, oh, it would have had more impact if a character had been killed off, but films like, you know, The Aristocats or whatever, they're light-hearted films. We're not necessarily expecting that to happen. Again, the end of The Jungle Book, when Baloo's out for the count, I don't think anyone thinks that film would be better if Shere Khan killed Baloo. I think it works really well. But this is a film that is trying tonally to have this be a bittersweet and tragic series of events that drives a wedge between two characters. I think this is the time to do it, and yeah, I agree, I think it's a real shame. And even in the watered down version, in my memory, Chief is really sort of paralysed and can't really talk anymore, whereas he's just got a dodgy leg, which again, it lacks a lot of the impact. I think they could have kept him alive, but still had it be a lot more traumatic. So yeah, I think it's a wasted opportunity.
It's not even just in the wasted opportunity, it's the fact that there were animators involved who had animated later segments under the guise that Chief dies. And if you watch that third act in your head thinking that Chief has died, it all makes so much more sense. And then I can only imagine if I was one of the animators and then they came in months later and were like, we've added this bit, we see Chief's eyes open to let the audience know he's okay. Also, we've got some test footage of Chief hobbling around with a broken leg. We're going to put that in beforehand. I'd be furious.
And since you say it, I'm thinking back of the few times we see Chief after this sequence. One is he's in a room by himself looking through a door at Amos and Copper. And then there's another one where he comes into a room and out of shot, Amos tells him to go back. So clearly this was footage that was just crowbarred into the film in some cases.
Not just to go back, but to go back or he'll break his other leg. Clearly showing how much he cares that he broke the leg to begin with.
Yeah, Amos a bad man. So Amos now is fully committed to killing Todd. He tries to barge into Widow Tweed's house with a gun just to shoot him there and then, but she pushes him away, but realises that Todd isn't going to be safe for long. So she makes the difficult decision to release him into the wild. And someone I know said that they've looked after wild animals, and they said this scene really captures how it feels when you've built up a connection with an animal, but the best thing is to let them go. And I do think it's a very sweet scene. I don't think it's perfect, and it is a bit schmaltzy, but I think it's a nice scene.
This scene is often regarded as one of Disney's biggest tearjerker moments. I've watched this film dozens and dozens of times, and it still always gets to me because it's so well executed.
Yeah, and I think the reason is, even though we've got anthropomorphic animals, it still captures the essence of releasing an animal, and that is the animal doesn't understand why you're doing this and why you're leaving them. And that is something that resonates in this moment.
And to really hammer my earlier point home, rewatch this scene with the understanding that Widow Tweed is doing this because Todd has inadvertently caused the death of her neighbour's dog.
But don't watch it thinking that all that could have been avoided if there hadn't have been a dog ban. Just a quick note though, if you have raised an animal in captivity, don't just dump it in the wild cold turkey without integrating it, because it will die straight away.
That is a very good point. I wish I could have more sympathy for Widow Tweed, but she is not the person to raise this wild animal, and she certainly makes no effort to help integrate it into the wild. During winter, she kept him locked in a house. That would have been perfect time to train him, taking him out to the woods every day, being like, okay, the end goal here is to get you back into the wild. I'm going to rehabilitate you until you can look after yourself. Instead, it's, I've had a nice pet for a year. Off you pop.
To be fair, the next scene is just Todd failing to function in the forest. He does get taken in by a friendly hedgehog, and then he wakes up the next morning, and they're kind of snuggled up, and the hedgehog kind of gives him a bit of a look. And then Todd's like, God, where am I? And I was like, did they do it?
First of all, it's a friendly porcupine. And secondly, it's voiced by Piglet. Yay.
Yay.
Unfortunately, the friendly porcupine... Do porcupines live in trees? I never knew this.
I didn't think porcupines lived in North America, which is why I said hedgehog. So, shows what I know.
The only reason I know porcupines live in North America is because of the porcupine in Homeward Bound.
We're not doing Homeward Bound.
I get all of my wildlife and geographical knowledge from children's films, basically. Honestly, if The Lion King didn't exist, I'd have no idea what animals were in Africa.
And it taught me that in all prides of lions, there's the main lion, the alpha male, and his younger brother, who's also there, and they get on fine.
So Todd's not having a great time in the forest. He's clearly not prepared for this at all. Big Mama showing concern for him in the first time in her life, I think. That's not fair. She strung her friends into helping him.
No, she's doing what she's always done, going, he's got a problem. Who can I find to sort this out for me?
Because yes, in looking for Todd, she accidentally stumbles upon Vixie, another fox, a female fox this time, and immediately realises Vixie can solve all her problems for her by looking after Todd instead. I've just opened my notes and I just have a note that just says, Big Mama is pretty manipulative.
I'm going to say this. There's a lot of badly written female characters in the world, but Vixie, literally when we meet her, she's just sat doing nothing. Big Mama says, do you want to meet a boy fox? And she says, yep. And then she falls in love with the boy fox, and that's all she does. Oh, she says she wants to have children. That's it.
And at one point very soon, she is insulted as an empty-headed woman. They've known each other no time at all, and that's the insult he goes to. First of all, how many women has he known that he knows to be misogynistic? I don't know how that came about.
Yeah, Todd goes very incel very quickly here. Because he sees her and goes, she's hot. I'm going to walk up to her and ask her to tell me her name. And then as soon as she laughs at him, he's like, oh, she's a terrible, horrible woman and I hate her.
I just realised as well, when Big Mama points Vixie out to Todd, she says, "That's another fox. A lady fox," and emphasises the lady, potentially adding more weight to our queer reading in this.
Yeah, I genuinely think that stands out as part of it, of saying, have you considered women?
I know your dog boyfriend broke up with you. I know how much you love musicians, but maybe try a woman. Women can also be musicians, I should add that.
My only other note on this sequence is when Vixie and Todd are kind of making up and getting a bit snuggly with each other. Big Mama sings a little song and it's quite sweet and you see these little moments. And then you get a wide shot. All the other side characters, including a grumpy badger, are just sat watching them at like from 2 feet away. I was like, that's really weird.
Also, Big Mama at that point is like, okay, guys, time for us to leave. And then Tigger jumps in with, oh, but it's just getting interesting. And I'm like, no, this is the time for you to leave. You shouldn't have even been watching them in the first place.
Don't worry, Boomer. Foxes are notoriously loud. You'll hear it.
So we are now well and truly into the third act of this film, and all we have left is the climax. And for all the criticisms and problems I've had sort of dotted throughout the film, I think the climax of this film is excellent.
It's superb, yeah. So Amos takes Copper and breaks into the nature reserve where Todd was released to hunt him down. He's brought a number of bear traps. And basically it's an extended sequence of Amos doing everything he can with Copper's assistance to find and kill Todd. Initially, they draw him into the bear traps and Todd narrowly escapes. Then they chase Todd and Vixie back to their burrow. And during this sequence, we get a full-on showdown between Todd and Copper. And again, I think this is, as we've said many times in these podcasts, a really good example of how much attention to detail the animators give when they're looking at animals, because the change in the way Todd and Copper look when they're baring their teeth and they're ready to fight, that's what animals do. And they can look cute and cuddly when they're not doing that, but when they're fighting for their life, they are vicious animals. And I think this sequence does that really well.
Quick aside on the note of how well they've captured animals. I know you said we were done talking about the birds, but I enjoy how much they nailed the movements of a finch and how much they just didn't care about the movements of a woodpecker.
Also, I swear woodpeckers aren't that big.
No. This whole sequence is fantastic. It's genuinely tense. Again, the score is working overtime here. It's fantastic. They really sell that Amos is a man with a vendetta. He is going out of his way to hunt this one particular fox. He's entering an area he's not allowed to hunt in because he says he's not hunting. They're just taking care of one fox. And he is a man obsessed. Again, this man obsessed threatened to break the other leg of the dog he is doing this for. I will stop going on about it, but it really does all come down to the fact that that change made so late into the production, it ruins this third act, because on its own, in a vacuum, this third act is fantastic.
Yeah, it really is, and things escalate more and more. Amos sets fire to the burrow and literally just has his gun pointed at the exit, waiting to shoot him. Todd and Vixie manage to escape, and they lose their scent by running through a waterfall. And as Copper's trying to pin the scent down, he scents something else, and an enormous black bear bears down on him and Amos.
This bear is terrifying and is so well animated. I couldn't find which animator was responsible for this, but it's absolutely fantastic. And it's a really nice moment as well that Amos's obsession with vengeance is ultimately going to lead to his death here. He even gets caught by one of his own bear traps, meaning that he can't even run away.
Yeah, my note on this section is, I think we all would have been fine if Amos was eaten by a bear. Because Bear's not paying any attention to Copper or Todd or anyone we care about. It's just about to eat Amos. And I was like, this is fine. I'm fine with this. But Copper isn't, and Copper, loyal to his owner, steps in to defend Amos from the bear. Obviously, it's a fight between a dog and a bear, and it goes about the way you'd expect. We neglected to mention during the second chase with Chief, there is a moment where Copper's given the opportunity to turn Todd over to Amos, but lets him go and says, I'll do it just this once. And as he's fighting the bear, Todd hears his whimpers, and conflicted between running off with Vixie, and going back. He chooses to go back to try and save Copper.
So here we have the culmination of these characters' arc, and it's wonderful. Todd goes back to save his friend, and he does so by using his power of luring animals to their death.
I think he looked around and went, we're at the climax of a Disney film. Where's a big thing we can fall off to into a body of water?
He lures the bear up the mountain, up the rocks, over a log, and the log is not enough to support the two of them, and they both tumble into the water, presumably to their deaths.
Todd, however, being the lucky fox that he is, just manages to survive and staggers out of the water, only to find himself face to face with Amos's gun. Copper, seeing this and remembering that Todd's just saved his life, staggers in front and whines, convincing Amos to put his gun down and finally let it be.
The whimper that Copper gives out is so well done. I assume they actually got a dog and just kind of chastised it for a bit until it made that noise, because it is a perfect dog whimper.
They actually made the dog method act, so they got a puppy and raised it with a fox. Yeah, it's a really sweet moment. And again, I think if we'd had different build-ups to this moment, it could be really, really powerful. I do like how low-key it is. Again, with the exception of the birds faffing about, really this film is just about the relationship between these characters. And again, it's a simple visual and it works really nicely. And I think it is a suitable conclusion to this film.
When you say it's a simple visual, I really have to stress just how much that is the case. There's almost no dialogue in this ending. We see Todd completely worn after his battle with the bear. Copper steps in front of him. They're not speaking. Copper whimpers, and seeing this, Amos lowers his gun, lets go of all of his vengeance, and just says, "Come on, Copper, let's go home." Todd and Copper don't say anything to each other. It's a completely non-verbal exchange between them, and it's wonderful. I well up every single time I see this.
And just as Copper walks away, him and Todd just have one little last smile towards each other.
Almost as if to say, remember the good old days with the band.
Ah, dear.
It's a 2.5 hour ordeal if you're ever willing to try it, but it's worth it.
Counterpoint, it's not worth it. And then we flash forward to life on the farm, post all this drama. Amos and Chief are both basically fine, which, again, I don't feel should be the case. And Copper thinks back one more time to growing up with Todd and the friendship they had. And then it just ends.
I will say, the ending is almost ruined for me by a terrible animation loop of Widow Tweed wrapping up Amos's foot, and she never seems to make any progress with it. It's just the same loop over and over again.
I mean, I'm going to say it. It would have been better if the film had ended in the previous scene. You just get that finale of Copper standing in front of Todd. Amos walks away. Copper and Todd share one last moment, smile at each other, roll credits.
Ooh, I do like Todd and Vixie overlooking the farms. But now I think about it, I don't like that they're so close in proximity. I like the idea that Todd is worlds away and they will never see each other again. So maybe you're right.
And thus we close on the main plot of The Fox and the Hound. Before we give our final thoughts, Liam, is there anything else you want to talk about regarding this film?
Before we can get onto our final thoughts, there is just one very, very important question we need to address. And that is, Ben, who is the sexiest character in The Fox and the Hound?
I think this one's pretty clear cut. It's Vixie.
I'm going to disagree.
What?
I'm really torn on this, because I know we're supposed to be as objective as we can be regarding the sexiness of animated animals. However, as I said, this is the film I've watched more than any other in my life. I watched it from a very young age and very frequently whilst I was young, and I think that this film contains my first childhood crush.
And that character is...
It's Todd. I had such a crush on Todd when I was a kid, and when I found out he was voiced by Mickey Rooney, I was gutted, but would have been more appropriate if it was Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell is a sexy man with a sexy voice. And I've still never quite put my finger on it. I don't know whether I wanted to be Todd because he gets the sexy girlfriend, or if I was attracted to Todd, but I'm just inexplicably drawn to that fox. So I actually think I'm going to put my money on Todd.
I mean, we established in Robin Hood that foxes are sexy, so fine, if that's where it needs to go, but my vote's going to Vixie. She's basically just Todd with longer eyelashes, because that's how you draw female cartoon characters, as has been established. I'm being ironic. I mean, I'm not being ironic, that's how they drew them, but that's not... Move on, Ben.
I wonder if when we get to Zootopia, the fox is going to come out on top again.
Look, Liam, you keep trying to bait me to talk about Zootopia.
Who am I kidding? It's going to be the Shakira gazelle. Who am I kidding?
With that established then, Liam, you said this is a film you've seen more than any other film. Having watched it many times over many years, how do you feel after this most recent rewatch?
There is a fantastic film somewhere in here, but it's been butchered beyond recognition.
So I've only seen this film twice, and the first time I watched it, I remember leaving feeling, okay, this is quite a different film tonally, but I actually like that it's quite focused on the relationship between two characters, and it is quite a bittersweet ending. But I think a lot of that was, hey, this is a new Disney film I've not seen, and rewatching it, I find it's just a bit depressing and a bit boring. There's not a lot going on, and for something that's ostensibly character-driven, we don't get a lot of personality in these characters, and we don't really get much in the way of relationships. So while there's some nice moments... So yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Liam. In this podcast, I always try and say, if I don't think something works, here's what I think they could have done to fix it. And I've tried to do that with The Fox and the Hound. Would that have made me change my mind on it? I don't know. But yeah, I admire what they were trying to do. I can't say I enjoy what they did.
It's the case with a few Disney films where I think that we're one, maybe two drafts away from something really special. And I think that's what's so frustrating about The Fox and the Hound. And I think a lot of it does come down to the execs and the money managers at Disney, who at this point, like, this was a struggling company. They did not know the future of the animation department. They were having much more success with live action. Animation was a dead medium to them. So if animators asked, can we just have another year and instead of animating these birds, animate more sequences with young Todd and Copper, they said, no, just get the B team to animate some birds for filler. The lost potential lies entirely with the higher-ups in this case, and I think that's what makes it so frustrating, because they're not going to do another stab at The Fox and the Hound. They might get a live-action remake one day, but I don't think... You know what? Maybe they should get a live-action remake, and maybe they should be more faithful to the source material. It's not what I want to see in live action. I think when you do live action with animals, it's weird and creepy, but I'd love them to just reattempt The Fox and the Hound. Maybe those younger animators who are now the top dogs at Disney, maybe they should helm this project and make the film they wanted to make originally. But in its current incarnation, which is what we're judging, it just falls short in so many annoying ways.
My only caveat with your suggestion there, Liam, is I always criticise Disney for revisiting stuff. So I don't want to see a fixed version of The Fox and the Hound. I want to see a new idea that has the spirit of The Fox and the Hound, the idea of simple, low-stakes relationship film. The Rescuers isn't far off, to be fair. Tonally, it's similar. Visually, it's fairly similar. And it's about the central relationship between two characters. And I just think they just got it right there, and they just missed the marks in a few key areas for this film.
Unfortunately, Ben, it's 2020 and we're in a post-Bob Iger Disney, so no new ideas. You've just got to pick the IP you want to see remade and hope they don't mess it up too badly. I, for one, am looking forward to their live-action remake of The Fox and the Hound 2.
All that considered then, Liam, does The Fox and the Hound make it onto the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
I think personally, I still love this film. The things it does right, I think it does excellently, but it is a shadow of its potential, and I just can't in any good conscience put it anywhere near the list.
I'm very much the same, and it was weird for me coming into this because, as I say, my memory of this film was that it was very striking and emotional and effective. And rewatching it, I've pretty much done a 180 and said, actually, the things it wants to do and the things it does are very different. So yeah, it's a no for me as well. Sorry, The Fox and the Hound, and your terrible midquel.
And with that, that is our discussion of The Fox and the Hound. But of course, we want to know, what do you think? Do you think The Fox and the Hound deserves a place on this list? After all, it is regarded as one of Disney's best tearjerkers. Have we been too harsh on the production flaws and not celebrated its strengths enough? Also, which of the foxes do you think is sexiest? Is it the obviously sexy one or the one that you had a childhood crush on? Let us know. Some of you may have had a childhood crush on Copper. You were wrong, but... And so, Ben, what are we going to be taking a look at next time?
Now, the 80s was a difficult decade for Disney, and perhaps nowhere is that more obvious than the film we're looking at next week. It's 1985's The Black Cauldron. I really don't know what to say.
Well, we had to get to it eventually. This, would you believe, is probably the film I've seen the second most in my life. 6-year-old Liam loved The Black Cauldron.
6-year-old Liam, then, is a wrong idiot. So that's everything from me and Liam. Let us know what your thoughts were on The Fox and the Hound, and we will join you next time when we're looking at The Black Cauldron.
No more being just the